The Atlanta Hawks very well may have to trade Trae Young this year. Welcome in or welcome back. Day 14, we're talking about the Atlanta Hawks, and boy, do I want to root for them. I have always appreciated Atlanta and the city, and especially the Hawks, if only for the rivalries they have given my favorite team, the Boston Celtics. While the Atlanta Hawks were one of the teams that made a bigger splash this year with the trade of DeJounte Murray, I'm not sure that that gave any confidence to anyone on the roster, including Trae Young, that they have a long-term future ahead of them. If we take a step back and look at the Atlanta Hawks last year, we saw the very obvious problem of what does Trae or DeJounte do when they don't have the ball? And the answer to that was essentially just stand in the corner, stand at the top of the key, and wait for the ball to swing to them. And that kind of offense was never, ever going to work. As a fan of basketball players who are great facilitators and great floor generals, and a fan of Trae Young particularly, I was a little disappointed in his off-ball movement. There were a lot of times last year, and before I get into the rest of the statement, I'm aware that it is an 82-game season. It's a long road, and you don't want to always give 110% effort every night. But it was very disheartening to see Trae Young, who used to be very good off-ball, especially when he was at Oklahoma in college. It was disappointing to see him not kind of put that effort into the NBA, especially when you have the roster that they did. Now, I don't want to make some sort of illusion that wasn't there. The Hawks were never going to win the championship last year. But when they made the conference finals against the Bucks, I really felt like there was that special moment where they could have taken the next step, the next logical step in making the NBA finals, and they just never got back to that ever again. And not all of that is Trae Young's fault. I don't want to pretend like that's what I'm saying at all. But when your superstar isn't doing superstar things like a Steph Curry does, like that player type does, where without the ball they are also a menace, or at the very least to creating a diversion for the rest of their team, it's kind of hard to excel. It should be noted that Trae Young has come out multiple times and said that he does not want to be traded from Atlanta. He wants to have a future there. He wants to build something special there. And from a pure human perspective, I completely get it. That was the one team. Yes, he was drafted by the Dallas Mavericks, and they made that switch on draft night for Luka Doncic. But the Atlanta Hawks were the team that gave him the opportunity. They were the ones that believed in him, and they were the ones that felt like he could bring them into the future. So I understand, from a human perspective, why you want to keep your roots there. But sooner or later, whether Trae Young wants it or not, the Hawks are going to have to make a move. And if I'm the GM and the Hawks aren't going anywhere and someone comes knocking at my door offering me multiple first-round picks for Trae Young, I think I have to at least let him in and let him talk. I am getting a little ahead of myself. That's more of an all-star break, end of season, off season conversation, and I want to focus on this year. And this year, they did give Trae Young one particular piece that I am happy and excited about in Dyson Daniels. I've always been a big fan of Dyson. I was watching him in New Orleans, and I saw how much of a defensive menace that he could be, and he has a little bit of offensive scoring game in him as well. But I think, especially in this offense, with Trae Young, he is going to be deemed as that lead guard defensively, the one that you build your defensive strategy around. And I think, especially after this Olympic season for him, that's his best suited role. It's been kind of a theme on this channel here where I'm talking about players and they have an Olympic bump. And I think that just speaks to how much great talent there is in the NBA, where a bunch of people can represent their home country and prove the next season how valuable that was. And I don't think that Dyson Daniels is going to be any different from anyone else that I've talked about having an Olympic bump. He played out of his absolute mind for Australia. If you got to watch any of those group play games, he was very much the best defender on the floor most nights. And particularly for this Atlanta Hawks team, Trae doesn't need another explosive offensive guard or another ball-dominant guard like they had in DeJounte Murray last year. They need someone who's going to play that Lou Dort, Alex Caruso, Jalen Suggs kind of role, someone who's going to do all the dirty work and hit open shots when you need him to. Another person on the roster I'm really excited for to see what he can do next year is Jalen Johnson. I had him in my most improved player conversation. He was also on my individual Roundball Renaissance Awards that I posted an article about. It was so exhilarating and so vindicating watching him from year to year, because even coming out of Duke and into that first season for him, you could tell that he had something, but he was kind of being stifled in that offense. Now, I don't want to pretend like Jalen Johnson, if he had a team all by himself, could average 35 and win MVP. I don't think he's that kind of player. But he's the perfect third piece, or the perfect maybe second fiddle in any offense that you want to run, because he's developing at such a quick rate that it's kind of hard to keep up with him. Year by year, his defense gets better and his shooting gets better, and I don't expect that to be any different this year. And I think that we're talking about fringes here, we may be seeing a birth or at least the first stepping stone to an all-star season for Jalen Johnson. And then last but certainly not least, we have to talk about the number 1 overall pick in this last year's draft, Zachary Richeche. It's going to be a real big question. It's going to be a really valid question on what he is as a basketball player. We saw him during the Summer League, and he was okay. Now, I don't want to pretend like other superstar players or other MVP caliber players have gone through the Summer League and looked bad or looked sluggish and not turned it around in the end. But seeing that as how that's the only bit of basketball content that we've been able to see with our own 2 eyes post the draft for him, it's kind of hard to not judge him and look at that and go, well, maybe he's just going to be a role guy, and that's not something that you wanted for a number 1 overall pick. I think the biggest surprise of the draft entirely was that the Hawks didn't trade away that pick. Every single insider that I had read up to the draft was like, yeah, they're not really sold on anybody in the draft. They may just trade the whole thing. They may trade down. They may trade down with the Spurs and have them take the number 1 pick. We never really knew what they were going to do. I think the last avenue that we expected them to go down was to actually select somebody with the number 1 overall pick. I think at bare minimum for Zachary Richeche is that he can be a great connector piece. Think someone like Draymond. I don't expect him to be the defender that Draymond is, but particularly in the offensive role, being able to connect other pieces together through his passing, I think, is where he may excel in the game. And because of how good Trae Young is as a facilitator and a floor general and a point guard, there's not going to be many other point guards in the league that's going to get the most out of him like Trae Young would. With all of that being said, I'm not sure that I view this Hawks season very favorably. I think if I'm being very generous, their ceiling is a 7th seed. And that's not to say that that can't be the case for them forever. I think that it's going to take some time to get Zachary Richeche up to speed. And if you're considering a Trae Young trade, you have to start from the bottom all over again. But for this season in particular, we're reaching for a 7th seed. We're reaching for a bottom half of a playoff spot. And I think at worst, we're probably competing for a top 5 pick in the draft. But that's all I have today. Do you think Trae Young's going to get traded? Let me know down in the comments below. Check my link tree while you're at it. Join the Discord. Be kind. Tell somebody you love them. And I'll see you tomorrow.